We have an exciting session now on the future of multi-stakeholder internet governance. We've heard quite a bit about that today already. We are very fortunate to have some international guests joining us today. This is sort of a way of connecting Australia to the global conversations that are taking place. I'll pass over now to the session moderator, committee member Pablo Hinojosa. Pablo?
Thank you, Lise. Welcome, everyone. I acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the land on which we meet today. I would also like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and those emerging. I also acknowledge that we have a number of parties joining by Zoom today from Johannesburg, Amsterdam, and Brussels. Welcome to this panel. This panel is about building the connection between Australia and what is happening in the world out there, particularly at the UN, the United Nations, in terms of international discussions about internet governance. And for this, we have an excellent group of panelists. I'm happy to welcome Anriette. Unfortunately, they cannot be all seen permanently until they speak, as I was told by the technical committee. Oh, they are there. Awesome. Anriette Esterhuysen, who was appointed by the Secretary General of the United Nations as the chair of the Multi-Stakeholder Advisory Committee of the Internet Governance Panel, in short, IGF MAG. She held that position for 2 years. We have with us as well Jordan Carter, Internet Governance and Policy Director at auDA. We have Chris Buckridge from Amsterdam, I guess, currently serving as a member of the IGF MAG, and Lise Fuhr, she's the Director General of ETNO, and importantly for this discussion, a member of the recently created high-level panel. Well, I call it still high-level panel, although they want to call it leadership panel of the IGF. All well-known and respected leaders in the history of internet governance, and we tend to see the IGF more as a movement than as a process. But this is something worth discussing today, I guess. And picking up a few threads of the great discussions that happened this morning in the panel about forging our future, I think something that is clear is that the multi-stakeholder governance model is at an important juncture. And we can see kind of those two different futures. In one future, we encounter an aging discourse that is becoming somehow irrelevant. In this discourse, we don't see very much the essence of the internet as it was conceived originally in terms of its operations, the ideal of an unfragmented, interoperable network, and also the ecosystem that has evolved over the years of painstaking effort. And this ecosystem is characterized by its community-driven, by its multi-stakeholder ethos, rooted in bottom-up and organic collaboration. In an alternative future, the internet existence is tacitly acknowledged, but the spotlight is shifting to challenges that orbit about applications and content. In these upper internet layers lie transformative technologies such as artificial intelligence, the metaverse, blockchain, and NFTs, each bringing unique set of governance challenges, but this alternative perspective envisions an amplified role for governments and intergovernmental entities where they seem or are looking to be the sole decision makers and enforcers of regulatory frameworks and become the main mechanisms for shaping online behavior and mitigating cybercrime. So this is the debate that we're going to have today. We're going to dissect these divergent trajectories, aiming to craft a hopeful future for multi-stakeholderism and the internet in the face of these pressing choices. So let's start with Anriette. And I would like to say that we're thrilled to have her with us. She's a true trailblazer whose influence has shaped internet governance over many years. You have had a very challenging time as the MAG chair during these pivotal years for the IGF. Johanna Weaver, you missed her, but she mentioned this morning that internet governance is having an identity crisis. Could you give us a quick rundown of what's at stake and the key challenges facing the future of the internet governance and the IGF, Anriette, your unique insights would mean a lot for us.
Thanks very much, Pablo. I hope you can hear me clearly. Is the connection good?
Yes.
Good. You know, we've had one of our undersea fiber optic cables was damaged. So, you know, and that's really affected the quality of the network. Pablo, I wouldn't say my time as MAG chair was more challenging than many others. I think in a sense, you know, it was the COVID years, but I think that on the one hand, that also demonstrated one of the things that I think is at risk, and that's the power of cooperation. I think that during the COVID years, there was a recognition that the internet was what was helping us survive and keeping the world connected to deal not with internet problems, but with real world problems. And as challenging as it was to chair the MAG at that time, there was this spirit of collaboration and cooperation. And the 2020 IGF was actually the biggest that has ever been convened because it was virtual. But what is at stake? I think a lot is at stake. I think we really are, as you say, at a very critical juncture. And I think that we've almost reached a point where instead of multi-stakeholder cooperation and the multi-stakeholder approach being this mechanism for being a means, a tool to create more inclusive internet policy, more social justice, more human rights, more development-oriented internet and other tech policy, a way of bringing together diverse interest groups, diverse stakeholder groups, and actually unpacking what the differences in those interests are and how we can navigate through those, but still by achieving goals that are societal goals, that are global goals. And that was very much what the World Summit on the Information Society was about. Yes, it did enshrine the principles of multi-stakeholder participation, but it was in a context of bigger picture goals, of creating more digital equality and digital inclusion, of a people-centered development and information society that was human rights oriented. I think we've kind of left all the big goals, you know, all the more aspirational goals, and we stuck at a very instrumentalist, almost competitive approach to multi-stakeholder. The analogy that I'd like to draw is and for two reasons, is carbon offsetting. I think we've become to use very often multi-stakeholder as a rubber stamp, as a way of creating legitimacy for our processes, our institutions, without really thinking through how inclusive are those processes, how effective are they at a substantive level, and achieving goals that are actually in the public interest, or goals that are positive goals for everyone, not just particular interest groups. And in the same way that carbon offsetting has become this very empty, vacuous, and actually quite dangerous principle that's abused by certain interest groups, I think that has happened with multi-stakeholder as well. I think we've also forgotten that you never really achieve change by making an approach to policy the goal in itself. It's how you use that approach, how you deploy it in context-sensitive ways that makes the difference. And, you know, I fear that at the moment we are at a juncture where, you know, if you look at the Global Digital Compact, the proposal for the new Digital Cooperation Forum, that competition within the UN system is actually having more impact on our effort to create true global cooperation, you know, than it should in fact be, which is the instrument of facilitating global cooperation. I think similarly, if you look at the goals in the Global Digital Compact as they are defined now, granted, nothing is final. The summit of the future will finalize those goals, but they're very shallow goals. They don't really address climate change, the relationship between people and technology and society and technology. They rubber stamp digital equality, instead of actually examining the fact that the way in which we are currently growing and growing digital technology creates more inequality. So there's no serious analysis there. I think similarly with human rights, it rubber stamps again human rights, and it talks about, sorry, there's a cat in the room. It talks about artificial intelligence and how to create more accountability among tech companies. But again, it doesn't actually talk about the business models. What are we doing in the way in which we're running our digital economy that's fundamentally prone to creating more inequalities? So, Pablo, I feel, overall, I think that we are not at a very positive juncture, certainly not from a social and economic development and social justice and equality perspective. But then I think at a very simplistic level, I think most of what is at cost is that the lessons that we've learned, our current, when I say our, I mean IGF, some of us who have national internet governance forums, ICANN, ISOC, all of these models are imperfect, but they've learned lots of lessons. They do need to be improved. They need to be deconstructed and analyzed and critiqued. But I think this approach that seems to be prevailing within the UN at the moment, which is to look at creating new forums, overlooks what is the most commonsensical thing we should be doing, which is analyzing what has worked well. What do we do? What have we achieved with the existing forums that work well? What works about the IGF? And then changing it and making it better. So I'll come back later. I'm sure there'll be questions, but on that rather gloomy note, I'm handing back to you, Pablo.
Thank you so much, Anriette. Cooperative efforts are at risk is a very interesting proposition for discussion today. We're going to do a round of the speakers, but then I want to open the floor as well for the audience to interact with the panel. So please have your questions ready. Jordan, auDA recently unveiled a roadmap for the future of internet governance, and this is perhaps along the way of these things that were discussed this morning about positive, proactive initiatives that we can put forward. Can you explain a little bit and dig deeper on that?
Yeah. Am I on? You can hear me? Okay. Yes, I can, Pablo, and thanks for the chance to join this panel. Some pretty esteemed colleagues up on the screen behind me. I'll make a few intro remarks and then quickly run you through and do all that in 5 minutes without talking at 100 miles an hour. One of the reasons we pulled together an internet governance roadmap at auDA, which we published a couple of weeks ago, because we wanted to make some concrete proposals to move the conversation along. So much of the dialogue recently in circles that we've been hearing is, oh, we've got to have something to say about the future of internet governance. And you ask people, well, what should we say? And they say, yes, we need to work out what we're going to say. And so you have this circular discussion, which ends up, I was just very struck by what Anriette just said. You almost have a governance system that's completely given up on the stuff it's meant to be governing. It's a system that's all form and no substance. And so we said we wanted to make a contribution to moving the discussion along. And why now? We've got this WSIS plus 20 review coming along at the United Nations in 2025. In 2024, there's the Summit of the Future, and part of that is going to be a digital track, because the Summit of the Future is all about saying, gosh, our global multilateral system of governance isn't working all that well. It was designed in the 1940s. Maybe we need to renovate it for the 2030s and beyond. Logical call. But that is going to set the trajectory possibly for that WSIS review. And the political direction for the Global Digital Compact is meant to be being established at a ministerial meeting in New York next month. Next month isn't years and years away. Next month is next month. So it's timely to be talking about these issues, and it's timely to be getting some concrete proposals out there. And one of the things I want to say there is that the digital governance issues that governments and many of us are concerned about are not going away. And they're not problems that the internet governance system was necessarily designed to tackle successfully. There are lots of big discussion forums in the internet governance system, like the IGF, like this regional IGF that's starting tomorrow, like Net thing, which is happening right now. But, to solve the challenges of AI governance or to deal with the impact of quantum computing, just to name two of the buzzword topics that are about, ICANN isn't going to solve that problem for you. The Internet Governance Forum probably isn't going to solve it on its own as well. And so we can't hope as an internet community that governments are just going to say, oh, well, there's this internet governance framework that will take care of all these problems. As states dealing with law and public policy, we just won't worry about it. That's a pipe dream. That's never going to be the outcome of any rational process, even in the circumstances of the United Nations and the General Assembly. So, if we want to stand up for internet governance, we might want to draw out some of those distinctions between the broader digital governance public policy challenges that the world is facing and the reality about the one interoperable global internet that we still have. I disagree with this morning's panelists who said that the internet is already fragmented. It's not. If you think the internet is the internet layer of the internet, semantic maybe. But there is a need to improve how the governance happens, to reinfuse it with substance. And that's kind of what our roadmap was getting to. One of the first things we said was that there need to be more explicit shared principles that structure this framework, at least partly so we can say where the edges of it are, where we can say better that, no, that's not an internet governance topic. Don't try and shoehorn it in here. If that needs to be solved, solve it with a new collaboration or a new institution. I'll come back to that point. We thought it might be quite timely going into the GDC and the Summit of the Future for the world to convene a Net Mundial Plus 10 event. It's about 10 years next April since Net Mundial happened. That came up with one of the rather better roadmaps and internet governance principles that have been evolved. So we suggest a 10-year review could be a way for a genuinely multi-stakeholder driven, diverse, community-driven input to be developed to shape the GDC and the later WSIS Plus 20 review. We said that we think, like many others, that the participation in the internet governance system isn't broad and diverse enough for it to be fully legitimate or even fully functional on its own terms. We need to be better at including effectively regions that are underrepresented, communities that are underrepresented, the fact that women are underrepresented. There are many perspectives that are missing from these debates that having in the room in a sustainable, real way, not in a tokenistic, we showed up for a fellowship and we sorted it all out way, would be helpful for. And that requires deep, sustained capacity building. It requires fellowships. It requires support of smaller states to be able to meaningfully engage. And we're saying that the technical community and the business community in particular need to stump up with some cash to help resource and expand those sorts of programs. On the substantive goals, we think it could be helpful, and this is a suggestion actually we've copied from Lise Fuhr, who may talk about something similar in her intervention, to connect some substantive goals for internet governance work to the Sustainable Development Goals. The SDGs, better or worse, are a framework the world has set for some ambitions about improving life for everyone. Wouldn't it be great to work out how the internet could contribute and then measure our effectiveness in actually making that contribution? We said that the technical internet community needs to get up and actually engage in these discussions. There are still some global internet organizations that are just not seeming to be interested or engaged in getting involved with this discussion about the Global Digital Compact, in shaping the WSIS Plus 20 review. And it requires deep collaboration and connection to work out how to shape this broader governance framework and to bring a useful technical community contribution to it. We calling on those organizations to get that collaboration back in place as it was so evidently 10 years ago, and to be actually adding the contributions that could be made. And we also think there's a space for the internet community broadly expressed to build some better ways to connect to these broader digital policy discussions when and where they happen, so that they're well informed on a technical basis and don't have to crowd into the internet governance system to find a place for them to be discussed in a knowledgeable way on the technical side of things. And the last one I'll mention, because I'm probably over time already, is that institutional innovation and evolution is probably a much safer way to go. We don't think that the Global Digital Compact's proposed Digital Cooperation Forum is a good idea. It's a shame that the UN Secretary General proposed it in the way that he did. It's a much better idea to meaningfully improve existing institutions like the IGF so that they can pick up some of those things. The idea of starting yet another forum and distracting further attention into ever more different channels of policy debate is probably the opposite of the directions that we should be going. And where tricky new digital governance topics need new collaborations and new institutions, let's build them fit for purpose and let's have them do the job that's needed to be done. So we're interested in being part of the discussion. We want to support progress on solving these issues, not only dialogue about them. And we want to put our money where our mouth is as well in terms of people's time and concrete contributions to making these discussions and evolutions happen. Because the challenge in front of us all is to either act to improve and develop this internet governance system or risk seeing it being swept away. And if it's swept away, one of the foundations of our modern lives, that free, open, secure, and global internet that we've relied on so much in recent years, is genuinely potentially at risk. And that's not something any of us should live with. Thank you.
Jordan, thank you. And auDA's recommitment that is really at full show here. Amazing. Congratulations. Chris, you have seen as member of the MAG, you have first row access to the latest hurdles, including the UN's attempts to reshape the roles, particularly that one of the Internet technical community. And considering these developments, do you believe that the IGF remains relevant in the present landscape? And more intriguingly, do you see the continuation beyond the scope of the Global Digital Compact?
Thanks, Pablo. I'm hoping everyone can hear me there. I can get a quick thumbs up.
Yes, we can.
Yes, great. Wonderful. Yeah, look, thank you so much for having me as part of this event. I think this is a really timely and important discussion. I'm really sorry that I couldn't be there in Brisbane with you in person. Though I think you're across the road from my old high school, so the experience might have been a little traumatic if I was. But my challenge at this juncture really is to basically agree with everything that Anriette and Jordan have said without repeating them in my 5 minutes. So I will do my best in that. And I'm certainly not. I'm not ignoring your questions here, Pablo. I'm going to come back to them. But I do want to go back a little just to point out that the title of this session, I think, is really important, that multi-stakeholder governance for the future, because that really does get to the heart of this. I think everything that's going on right now in the UN, in GDC, looking ahead to the WSIS plus 20, and actually a lot of what's going on also in the technical community and other spaces, is bringing a new level of scrutiny to that multi-stakeholder approach. And I think it has become easy for us to take for granted that idea of a multi-stakeholder approach to internet governance, that commitment that we got there, and really to lose sight a little of the significance of that WSIS outcome and the achievement of getting that multi-stakeholder approach documented, committed to, built into the structures that we have, because it was not necessarily the outcome we would have expected from WSIS. It was something new, and it sort of put the onus on the whole community, the multi-stakeholder community, to come up with what that meant going forward. And I think Anriette was talking a little bit about this, sort of the idea that it's become a bit of a shibboleth almost, that idea of multi-stakeholder. It's something we just pay deference to and we talk about without necessarily digging into the reasons why it was there in the first place, the goals that we actually set up a multi-stakeholder approach to work towards and to achieve. And so there's a need for us maybe to get back to that, digging deeper into the reasons behind it. I think one of the reasons that we can lose sight of it a little bit is that it is not just, it's not a consistent model. It's much more a sort of an approach, a principle, something which sets the framework, but which is then adopted in many different kinds of ways by different organizations, different institutions. And I mean, it's useful to look, there are some very basic principles that are reasonably consistent there across these models. There's obviously the openness to the participation of all stakeholders. There's the transparency of proceedings, of discussions, of what's going on. And there is consensus decision-making, because when you have a multi-stakeholder construction of any kind, it's very difficult to have a voting system. So you really do focus much more on reaching a consensus agreement in terms of a solution. Now, I think things start to get a lot more heterogeneous, I guess, when you get to the next stage here, and that's looking at how the stakeholder groups are defined. And so I'm coming from having worked in the ISTARs and specifically the regional internet registries. And their approach there is very much sort of everyone's one giant mass. Multi-stakeholder means everyone is participating as an individual, all working towards a consensus agreement. That's great, and that's existed prior to WSIS, obviously. But it obviously also has challenges for certain kinds of stakeholders, governments being one of them. Now, since the 2000s, and I'm looking here not just at the UN, but also at ICANN, there's been much more of a shift to defining stakeholder groups, and those stakeholder groups having their own specific processes. But that brings its own sort of tension of stakeholder groups jostling for position. And I think that's what Anriette also mentioned, the competition that we see. And it also comes back to what you mentioned, Pablo, in terms of the UN's recent discussion and the discussion from the technical community of the role the technical community plays and whether it should exist as a separate, distinct stakeholder group. Now, I think those kind of discussions are not a bad thing. Partly, I think internet governance, we shouldn't assume it will be easy. We shouldn't assume it will be without some conflict and tension, because that's kind of the process. We sort of argue, we discuss, we battle our way through to a solution. But I think the other important thing is that it makes us think about these stakeholder groups and think about the reasons that we have them. So part of the discussion is, what does this technical community stakeholder group as a distinct entity bring to the discussion here, bring to the process, and why is there a need for us to maintain that? And I think there are some very good, strong answers there in terms of, and looking to what Jordan was talking about, the idea that we need not just to think about, you know, business and how we do business, not just to think about sort of the social impacts, but we need to have a stakeholder group that's also thinking about the technology itself, thinking about the sort of the underlying technical principles of the internet that we need to maintain as we evolve our governance, as we evolve the role that the internet plays in society. So I think this is not a bad discussion to be having. It's actually quite important. When we turn then, and Pablo, you were talking about the IGF and its significance in relation to the GDC and going forward beyond the GDC, I think the IGF's commitment and living of a multi-stakeholder approach is really what makes it so relevant in the present landscape. I mean, we are in a situation now in a context where there are a lot of other models either occurring. We see in the UN, we've got the OEWG doing its work on cybersecurity. We've got this ad hoc committee working on a cybercrime treaty. We also have proposed ideas, the HLAB. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the full text there, but there was a proposal there for a commission on digital inclusivity and sustainability, I think. And as Jordan mentioned, the Digital Cooperation Forum that was mentioned in the policy brief. These are all floating around and being discussed. All of them, I think, represent a step back from the sort of full multi-stakeholder embrace that the IGF has embodied. And I think we need to be really aware of that and cautious of that. I think, you know, and in some ways it's the easy step to sort of say, okay, we fall back on multilateral government to government discussions with just consultation from other stakeholders. it's particularly easy when we've got such fraught and tense geopolitical situations going on. But just because it's the easy solution, don't think means it's the best solution. I think there are important reasons that we established a multi-stakeholder approach, and there are important reasons for continuing that going forward. And the IGF is really our best bet in that sense. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much. I'll look forward to speaking more.
Chris, thank you. And Lise, welcome. Very kind of you to be this morning with us today. We're curious to learn your perspective on internet governance from these higher echelons of the IGF leadership panel that you are a member of, recently created one. In contrast, I would like to suggest with the IGF MAG, so would love to hear your views.
Thank you, Pablo, and good afternoon, everyone, and good morning here from Denmark, where I am right now. And it's a great pleasure to represent the leadership panel today in this very timely and I think extremely relevant discussion. And I don't want to say in contrast to the MAG, because I think we are working very much with the MAG. So I think the first thing to understand is that the leadership panel for me is not a new and additional decision-making body or council of IGF. This remains within the capable hand of the MAG, which brings together representatives of various constituencies to organize IGF every year. But we have been given a mandate from the Secretary General of the UN to provide expertise and strategic input to the processes of IGF, and also to promote IGF as such, including securing funding. And funding is one of the very important points too that we will look into as a leadership panel, or we are looking into it as we speak. Our main outputs have in fact been to take the IGF messages and amplify them, not replace them with something new. And I think that's important, that we're not trying to build an overlaying top-down approach to IGF. The MAG is still the MAG. We're trying to look into the more strategic improvements that can be done with IGF to empower and make IGF stronger and not vice versa. And we have made 4 sub-working groups. One is the funding working group. Another one is how we can do outreach. We also have a working group. We'll look into IGF, MAG, leadership panel cooperation and how we can strengthen IGF together. And the last one is, how do we look at strategic issues and how can we make IGF, as some have mentioned, more goal-oriented, more concrete? How can we empower IGF to be the place you want to go when you look at internet governance and the internet as such? Now, if we look at IGF and what we have looked at both in IGF, but also the process on the future of IGF and the WSIS process, is very important to note that we deal with issues far beyond internet governance in IGF. 20 years ago, it was much more stringent, but now we look at data, we look at AI, we look at climate change, cybersecurity. So I think we need to reflect on whether IGF should have a broader mandate looking at such digital issues that are enabled by the internet. So not to just look at climate, but how can internet enabling climate or help climate change? What Anriette was mentioning on, we need to look at inclusion, we need to look at equality, we need to look at IGF in a broader sense, but also to make sure all voices are heard there. And as the leadership panel, we work closely with the MAG. The chair of the MAG seat sits in the leadership panel. We have a number of MAG liaisons, people attending our working groups. And we also have joint working meetings with the MAG. We had one in Geneva. We also had in Vienna and Addis Ababa. And I think that collaboration with the MAG is important because the MAG has all the history, all the knowledge from 20 years of IGF, almost 20 years. And that collaboration will make us stronger and not create any, I hope we will not have any collisions. It's more a matter of how can we cooperate in the best possible way. And in addition to being the loudspeaker for the IGF message and using our high-level networks, I think it's important we share the importance of the IGF with the key decision makers. So we want to kickstart a process of the digital set goals for the digital world or the internet we want. And that's where, as mentioned by Gordon, we're trying to build on the idea of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And I think it would be worth considering what specific and measurable goals for the internet we could create. This is meant to be a multi-stakeholder process, and what should those goals be? Should it be connectivity, access, education, protections of rights online, and what the internet we want? How does that look, and how can we get there? And I think it's a project, and it's a way of not embracing the Global Digital Compact, but to make sure that we have a framing for Internet Governance Forum, hopefully can help create that kind of organization and discussion forum. We need to take all the difficult discussions, because that's what we're missing sometimes in the UN, because it becomes extremely political. Where I've seen IGF have embraced and opened up for discussions of difficult issues. I think we need all players to be around the table. So we need governments, we need technical communities, NGOs, also industries and local government. So if we can attract all, like the SDGs do every year, that would be great. So with that, I'll hand over to you, Pablo.
Lise, thank you so much. And thank you for joining from Denmark. All right, so that's the backdrop. And I would really like for you to interact with this incredible panel. So what I would like to suggest is to allow for 2 or 3 questions that I will take back to back and then distribute them along the speakers. Who would like to intervene first?
This is the problem with the afternoon tea, sugar effect.
Don't be shy. Excellent.
We know this.
Over there. One here.
Super.
Hi, everyone. It's Big Alpha again. Thank you all the panel members for such an engaging discussion. I just had a quick question about how we can balance collaborative approach versus competitive approach, because yes, we need to regulate the internet. Yes, we need a holistic approach to privacy, but then, you know, different jurisdictions, especially if we talk about even within the Western states like US, EU, and Australia have their own digital economy approaches, which are competing against each other. So, you know, so I think the question is, everyone's trying to compete against each other. So how can we form a collaborative approach and a more holistic approach? Thank you.
That's an awesome question, but can you just state for the record your name and affiliation?
My name is Vikalpa, and I'm a sessional academic at KUT.
Awesome. Thank you. Welcome. You were next, Sandy?
Thank you. For the record, previous chair of NetThing, which is sort of still an attempt, I think, to be an IGF or domestic IGF. Forgive my ignorance, but one of the things that I've really loved about the IGF is just how intentionally broad the topics have gotten over the years, that it is a place, as Paul Wilson once taught me, for decision makers, but not decision making. And the topics are covered are really broad and complex and important. So I just want to get you to hold that thought. But we have this landscape in front of us now where the model of internet governance is under threat. And in auDA's roadmap that they've just put out, they've defined internet governance as a means of institution and processes that govern and coordinate and sustain discussions on matters of importance to the underlying technologies of the internet. So I think they're positioning internet governance within a broader technical policy, digital policy arena. And I suppose I wanted the panel's thoughts on that, because as we struggle here in Australia to figure out, can we tackle every topic from AI to climate change, or do we go into battle to preserve the current model of internet governance? So I would just love the panel's thoughts on how broad this thing is, or can we narrow for the next couple of years because the threat is right in front of us around the model itself. I hope that question was clear.
Thank you so much, Sandra. Very clear. One more question, the last one, and then we go back. Chad, awesome. Maybe something that would be great is if you can stand up and also look at the camera so they can look at you. The camera is over there.
Okay, hello. Hi, Anriette. Okay, sorry. This is a little bit strange. Okay.
Indeed.
I forgot my question now. No. Okay, my name is Chad. I'm from APC. I guess my question is this, right? I mean, you're saying that there's all of this simultaneous mechanisms, new mechanisms, ongoing mechanisms. So my question is, one, can they all coexist? Or do we really, is the path here to choose one or two over the others? And for us who have not, as we try to engage from civil society as much as possible, but we don't have that kind of resources unless, and that begs the question, right, of being collaborative. How do you break this deadlock? Is it actually possible, or are we in a cycle where this will just go on and on, this sort of process where we're trying to find new mechanism and then we end up in the same place, whether you have so many of them? Thanks.
Thank you so much. I really think that these are three very important, current, relevant questions. One is about cooperative versus competitive. How do we solve that? If I can summarize that. Second one, it was in different layers, but I would call two of them. One is internet governance as underlying technologies or as an all-encompassing governance solution for all sorts of questions, right? And the third one about new mechanisms or fit for purpose. Can I kind of talk about that? Is it okay if we do a quick round? I would like to start with Anriette and Chris because both spoke about this competitiveness and risk to cooperation. Anriette, let's go first, then Chris, then Lise, then Jordan.
And thank you, Pablo and Chat. It's lovely to see you. And everyone else who I heard didn't see. Those are good questions. I think they get to some of the sort of substance. I'll try to respond to them and also pick up on some of Lisa and Chris and Jordan's points. I think the issue of competition is, well, let me put it this way. There's always going to be multiplicity of types of governance processes. I work a lot in access. That means I work with telecoms companies. I work with telecoms regulators. They make decisions in particular ways. There's a particular business model. Some work, some doesn't work. We've learned, for example, in Africa and in Latin America as well, in many places, that universal access funds don't really work. They don't work as well as they should. So why do we continue to use that model? So I think that applies to the question that, of what governments are doing in terms of how they're responding. I think there will be different responses. It's good. Policy has to be context sensitive and substance sensitive. I think what we do lack, and Jordan touched on this, is shared principles. So I think diversity, you can even call it competition, different ways of applying the multi-stakeholder approach is good. I do think we need shared principles. I think the Net Mondiale, Jordan, I'd love to discuss that, because I think we can also learn from what did not work about the Net Mondiale. And what did not work was that it wasn't connected enough to the UN system. And so we ended up with excellent principles, but that were not taken up by the largest intergovernmental framework in the world. I think on the question of the broadness versus the narrowness, I think to some extent this whole digital governance versus internet governance debate, it's a non-issue. What is behind both of those areas of governance is the relationship between society and technology. And technology will always evolve. At the moment, our digital ecosystem really has the internet at the center of it. Maybe AI, which is not a new thing, it's been around, it's gaining more prominence. But the bigger picture issues are, how do you make policy in a way that achieves positive results and that prevents harm? And I think that applies as much to broader digitalization as it does to internet governance. So separating them, I think, is not particularly helpful, but I think being specific is. And Jordan mentioned this, it's in the auDA roadmap, that if you are going to innovate or create new institutions, do it on the basis of making them fit to purpose and design those mechanisms, not to be a digital governance forum as opposed to an internet governance forum, when in fact the IGF was that Cheryl that spoke from the floor and said, the IGF has been dealing with a broad range of digital issues for years and years and years. So this notion that the IGF is a narrow internet governance space, just doesn't hold any water. But if you are going to create new forums, make them much more focused and design them in a way to have the expertise and the legitimacy and the transparency and the content, the expertise to do their work well. And I think then on Chat's question, I think that maybe Chat, I've answered that as well. I think that there will need to be different spaces. We already have different spaces to deal with different issues. But I think that they have to come from a place not of just reinventing the wheel or just creating, more burdens to actually, on stakeholders to participate, as opposed to incrementally improving what we have. For example, if we are going to deal with specific issues around climate change and technology, let's work not just with our existing digital forums, but also with the forums, the many that exist that are trying to address climate change and create a little bit more harmony and cooperation amongst them. So I do think the institutional landscape does have to evolve, but it has to evolve from a place of achieving common goals based on shared principles, as opposed to the kind of institutional competition and sort of juggling for power that I feel is or influence, maybe power is not the right word. And then just my final comment, I do think that we have to have governments in this ecosystem, and we have to recognize that governments do have certain responsibilities and make certain decisions that is part of the broader internet or digital governance ecosystem. And we shouldn't take away from those responsibilities. Maybe not all decisions are made by multi-stakeholder mechanisms, but all decisions need to be made based on multi-stakeholder participation.
Thank you so much, Anriette. Comprehensive. Chris.
Thanks, Pablo. Thanks, Anriette, and thank you to the questioners. I'll go through quite quickly here. I think the question about competition is an interesting one, because Miriam Kuna, the RIPE chair, often comes back to this in terms of the RIPE itself started out as cooperation between competing private sector interests. So it was that recognition that to compete effectively, to sort of work in this industry, there needed to be a level of coordination of ensuring interoperability. And I think that's something obviously a little different now, that we're not just talking about network operators, we're talking about a whole other bigger multi-stakeholder sort of ecosystem. But there is a lesson perhaps to be learned there, that there is a need for that underlying level of coordination to ensure interoperability, to ensure that the network of networks still works. On the other two questions, which I think are very, very related, I mean, I think one of the interesting things that's been happening in the IGF in the last year and a half, I guess, is this policy network on internet fragmentation. And one of the three areas that it identified as a sort of fragmentation risk is fragmentation of the coordination and governance level. And that's a very real issue. And it's something that a lot of different actors in the UN and outside the UN have identified as a challenge. You know, when the issues become so multifarious and the venues become so prolific, it's how do you actually cover that? How do you follow the conversation? And we've seen, you know, that raised as a sort of justification for, say, this new digital cooperation forum that the Secretary General proposed in the policy brief. Now, I think that always reminds me of this next KCD cartoon from years ago, which talked about, there's one panel, there are 14 competing standards. The next panel, someone says, we need a new standard to meet everyone's use cases and get rid of these. And then the next panel says there are now 15 competing standards. So just creating a new venue that says we're going to bring all of this together here doesn't make sense. Building on what we have, building on the IGF as a sort of venue for this makes a lot more sense, not only because the IGF already has the experience in being a multi-stakeholder venue and has that history and legitimacy, but just in terms of efficiency, it makes a lot more sense to build on something that is there and existing and has the sort of the buy-in and the involvement. Something which has been growing and evolving and producing outcomes, it should be noted, for 17 years now, while chronically under-resourced. So this is, I mean, I think that in itself is a remarkable achievement and something that we need to look at, well, what could we actually achieve if some of the resources that are currently going into coming up with new solutions or new ideas were actually just diverted and driven into the IGF to actually strengthen that approach. So hopefully that's where we can steer the conversation going forward.
Lise.
Yes, just need to unmute myself. Very, very good questions, very difficult to answer. I think on the IGF being very broad, I think it's important we stay broad. I think, as I said before, it's a place where you can discuss some of the difficult issues. And I think this is where all the stakeholders meet each other. So to me, it has been a very important forum for those discussions. But I think the mandate is more narrow than it actually is unfolding itself. So IGF is broad, even if the mandate is more narrow. That's why I think it could be important to look at broadening the mandate. And I think the Digital Cooperation Forum suggestion is kind of a sign of has not been seen as this forum where you actually discuss these things like AI, like data, like how climate change can be helped by the internet. But we have discussed them in IGF. And I think if we can create IGF into a forum where we have a bit more target, bit more tangible outcome, we would eliminate that the Digital Cooperation Forum because it's not needed. We have it already, and I think I agree with Chris and also Anriette. We have a model that can be evolved into something that can embrace what is tried to be mended with a Global Digital Compact and the Digital Cooperation Forum. And on new mechanism, if they can coexist, of course they can. The more mechanisms you put out there, the more work it creates. We lack funding in IGF. If you get another forum, would that suck away all the funding from IGF? There are many concerns, and as one of the people asking questions said, we're an NGO. We don't have the capacity. No, none of us has the capacity to deal with more forum. We want actually to kind of collect them into one forum, and we have the IGF that works well, so why create a new one that will kind of replicate what we're doing? So I think it's more a matter of showing the governments it's an important IGF is an important forum, and we can change it into something a bit more tangible so they can bring something home. And that's why I think creating the SDGs for the internet could be a good idea.
And Jordan.
Just really quickly, I think that the insight that I've taken away from 20 years of working in this internet governance realm is that what matters about multi-stakeholderism is that it pulls together the people who know about and are affected by a thing, and it forces them to argue to something that's workable and durable. And so that doesn't mean that you have to be committed to a particular institution or a particular process. If you think that approach can help solve problems, and it seems to be quite good at solving some problems, then let's deploy it to solve some of these newer, broader digital technology problems. On the scope creep question or cooperation versus competition, the only thing I would say is we need to keep enough attention on doing the governance of the old-fashioned internet bit to make sure it keeps working, because it's a sort of profoundly open technology that allows a whole bunch of other things to happen. And if we lose it, we will miss it more than we could possibly imagine.
And with that, we have to start closing the panel. I hope it was of interest to all of you. Some takeaways for those that are new, you have to, so you're welcome to read about the Internet Governance Forum. The global one will happen in Kyoto in October, but the regional one will start right here in this venue starting tomorrow. So we have the local, the regional, and the international, and this was trying to build a bridge around that. If you want to go further, definitely read the roadmap that auDA just published. Highly recommend. Read about the Multi-Stakeholder Advisory Committee and the leadership panel into the IGF and the Global Digital Compact. All of these things were mentioned, and these are processes ongoing in the UN. And my key takeaway is take awake as well. Evolution or revolution, and it's quite interesting how the communities from the bottom up are kind of claiming evolution, lessons learned, improve what it is there, And there is kind of a certain top-down revolution trying to say, no, let's just open up new forums. Let's change the process. Let's expand or narrow, whatever it is. So how can we come into agreement between those competitive views, the communities and the top levels? All right, with that, we give chance to the next panel, and I gave 8 seconds into the floor.
Thank you, Pablo. And thank you also to Chris, Anriette and Lise, who I'm not sure what time it is, but I'm sure it's not terribly convenient for them to join us. So I'm very grateful that they've made the time to connect us to some of the global conversations taking place.